Well, hey, welcome to church today. It's so good to be with you. My name's Chris. I'm one of the pastors here at Resonate. We're excited to get into a sermon series called Reconstruction, where we're taking a look at what it looks like to build your foundation on a firm foundation, a solid rock, that rock being Jesus himself. So we're excited to get into the Bible today. We're excited to learn about the ways and the works of Jesus together as we do this. When I was in college, I was discipled by a good friend of mine whose name was Drew. Love him dearly. And he had two jobs. One of his jobs was he was a pastor, and that was kind of the most prominent role in his life. And his second job was he was an illusionist. He was an illusionist, like a cool magician. And that's, maybe a strange combination of jobs. That's even what he would say. Not a lot of people have this combination of jobs. But at the time when I was in college, I was living in a fraternity, and he would come to the fraternity, and people knew that he was the pastor. And then some people knew that he was also an illusionist. And so some people would be like, hey, do a trick for us on cue. And he would do a trick on cue. He was on the spot. And as we began to walk together in life, he would show me behind the scenes of how magicians and illusionists do some of their tricks. And you would think that when someone whose job is to create illusions, you would think that when they show you how they do it, that my reaction would have been, oh, that's it? Man, people are so gullible. I can't believe how stupid people are. But my reaction oftentimes was the exact opposite, where I went, man, you put a lot of work and a lot of thought into how to create an illusion of reality for people. And there's entire, businesses, entire companies that just specialize in fake coins, like spring-loaded coins and false fingers and phony decks of cards. And people go to great lengths to create the illusion of reality. And oftentimes I think about this when I think about truth and lies, because sometimes it's really difficult to distinguish between what is true and what is a lie, because the lie masquerades like the truth. It's not usually very overt. It can oftentimes be very subtle, very hard to distinguish. And so our hope in this series is that we put some prominent lies in front of you that could potentially take you down and help you to identify them, help you to combat them, help you to know what the truth is instead of buying into that lie. So that the construction of your life and the construction of your worldview, the construction of your purpose and your understandings of God are built on truth and not on falsehoods. So we'll do that over the next few weeks. When you think about God, as we start off this series, there's probably a whole host of things that you think about when he comes into your mind, many imaginations about him. And usually, most people, when they think about how God interacts with their story, they think that there's two main characters in the story, God and you. And really, you're the two primary characters in your life. But when the Bible talks about the narrative of history and the personal interactions that people have, it actually introduces a third character who acts as the antagonist. And so we're going to talk about who the Bible names as Satan. That's the name that the Bible gives to the enemy. It's not a political enemy. It's not an ideology. That's the enemy. For the church and for the Christian, agnostics and atheists are not the enemies of us. But there is an enemy his name is Satan, and Jesus describes him as the father of lies. The father of lies is the way that Jesus describes him. It's important to know when you think about the antagonist in your life, the antagonist in history, the antagonist of the story, that Satan's primary mode of distracting and destroying is not violence. It's not spells. It's not spooking people. It's lying. And Satan is a master deceiver, a master liar. So knowing that you have an antagonist, knowing that there is someone who's against you, and knowing that their primary weapon is lying is really helpful for you, so that you can essentially get to see what is and what is not true. The very first lie that Satan tempts humanity with, we're going to look at today, because it's important to know that, but it's also it's important to recognize that this is potentially the first lie that he will tempt you with as well. This is from Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord had made. He said to the woman, "Did God actually say that you should not eat of any tree in the garden?" The woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, 'You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden. Neither should you touch it, lest you die.'" So the scene is the Garden of Eden. The scene is God creates the world, creates humanity. And these are the opening pages of history, the very curtain being pulled back at the beginning of the show. And here's what happens. The serpent said to the woman, "You will not surely die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good from evil." So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food and that it was a delight to the eyes and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and she ate it. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. And then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths. This part of history is called the fall. It's called the fall. And it's not because of the pumpkins and the boots. That's not why. We call this the fall because this is the moment where humanity falls out of a relationship with God. This is the very moment. And it comes through the attempt of mankind to self-define reality for themselves. God creates the garden. He creates the world. He defines it. He says what it's about. And then he makes the rules. This is what you should do and this is what you should not do. And the first lie of Satan is that you don't have to listen to God. You don't have to listen to God. You don't have to obey his rules. You can make your own rules. You can make your own rules. There's a word for the belief that you can self-define truth and self-define purpose and self-define rules. There's a word for that, and that word is relativism. Relativism, we're going to talk about that a lot. Relativism is the you do you approach to life. It's the what's true for you can be true for you, but it doesn't have to be true for me. And what's true for me can be true for me, but it doesn't have to be true for you. You can explore as an individual. You can define as an individual. You get full autonomy as an individual. You can create your own truth, and you can define and create your own purpose as well. And relativism is extremely attractive. It's very, very attractive, very compelling. It's also very harmful, very dangerous. Why do I say that it is compelling? Well, the idea that you can make your own rules and self-define your reality and have full personal autonomy makes you into a god. It makes you into a god. It gives you full range. Ultimate decision-making is on a platter in front of you. If you don't like something, you don't have to do it. If you don't agree with something, you don't have to believe it. If you don't want something, you don't need it as a part of your life, and you get to do what's best for you, and you know what's best for yourself. That is the compelling aspect of relativism, and it masquerades as total freedom for yourself. Total freedom. You get to make the rules and call the shots. It's very compelling, but it's also very harmful. It's very harmful, very dangerous. Why? How do we see that? Well, I'll just give you a real world example right now. The COVID-19 pandemic is very controversial, and it's giving a fascinating worldview into the complexities and the problems around the issue of relativism. Do I have to get a vaccine? Do I have to wear a mask? Do I have to quarantine? These are all issues that are at hand right now. And you have a certain group of people that say, yeah, you have to. You must. This is very real. And this is really important. This is very serious. And so you have to. And then you have another group of people that say, actually, I don't think it's as serious as a lot of people say that it is. I'm not seeing that same sort of seriousness, and I don't want to have other people's ideologies pushed onto me. You have another and totally different group of people that say, let's just all get along. You do you do what you want. Let's just all make sure we're not arguing. Let's just make sure we get along. And what's happening is chaos ensues. When you get to define your own reality, it's just a matter of time before your self-defined reality infringes upon somebody else's self-defined reality. The two have a hard time coexisting together, and the result is families get broken apart, friendships get busted up and broken apart. Right now, we're watching the complexity of relativism really play out in our world. And the you do you of relativism doesn't truthfully work in society, in relationships, in science, or in morality. It really doesn't work out. There's three things that in the garden Satan whispered to Adam and Eve that would lead them towards a future of relativism, believing that they can make the rules. And we'll look at these because I think he'll also whisper these three things to you. The first is this: God has not spoken clearly. God's not spoken clearly. Did God actually say that? Did he really say that? Let's just critically think about this. Did he really say that? This is very popular on social media right now. This is very, very popular on TikTok right now. An influencer leaves their normal feed of fashion and funny dancing and pranks and makeup, and all of a sudden, for one day, they become an expert on theology. They become an expert on Bible translations, and they apply their expertise to one specific hot topic issue. And they go, hey, did God really say that thing about this one issue? Trust me, I'm an expert because I'm famous. And what can happen is a little crevice of doubt starts to play out in your mind, and your entire perception of Scripture can change. The whisper of relativism here is you can make your own rules because the Bible is untrustworthy. It's open for interpretation. It's pretty old, it's outdated. It wasn't meant to be directly followed. It was canonized a few hundred years after Jesus walked the earth. And all of this whispers to you, did God really say that thing? Can you really trust what he said? And that wedge, that sliver of doubt turns into a wedge that can create a foundation and a crack in the foundation of your faith. This is another sermon for another day, but I do think it's important for you just really quickly to hear why we think that the Bible is the most historically accurate document and trustworthy document of all of antiquity. If you were to go in your backyard right now, grab a shovel and go in your backyard, you start digging. Let's just say you start digging in your backyard and you come across a document, a letter. And this letter is a letter from Abraham Lincoln himself. And you pull that out, you go, I have a Lincoln letter. Well, that's great, but you realize you can't just claim that this is a true thing because you found it in your backyard and it has his name on it. There's actually a historically a way that historians would validate what's called the textual authenticity and textual reliability of that document. They would subject that letter to a series of multiple tests. Here's some of the tests. The first is a time gap test. They would ask how long between when the event described in that document happened and when the document itself was written. What's the time gap in between when the event occurred and when the document was written? And that time gap is hugely important. In the New Testament, we see that the time gap between Jesus walking the earth and the latest book that was written from the New Testament was about 70 years. That's the total time gap, 1 to 2 generations. So the people who are writing the New Testament have access to primary source witnesses and secondary witnesses, the descendants of people who were directly there. This is one of the ways that when we look at the textual reliability of the Bible, next to the reliability of the Quran, next to the reliability of the Book of Mormon, we go, hey, just objectively, the Bible is more textually reliable. When the Bible gives an account of the birth of Jesus, one generation away from the birth of Jesus, and then the Quran comes 600 years later and tries to edit what the Bible says, and it was written in 600 AD, we just go, okay, even if you just go, I don't know in the moment if Islam is the way to go or Christianity is the way to go, you can at least say the Bible is more textually reliable according to the time gap. It's also important to note that the test is not how long ago was the event, as if to say if things happened a long time ago, we just can't believe them. No, the test is the gap between when the event happened and when the document was written. The second test was called the multiplicity test. How many of these documents have been unearthed? So if you pull up a Lincoln letter from the ground and it's one of one, it's totally unique. Man, that thing might be worth a ton of money, but it's not actually very reliable. It's very susceptible to being forged or to being faked. And what we see in the Bible is that there are so many copies, so many manuscripts, so many multiplicities unearthed, far beyond the number of manuscripts unearthed of any other document in antiquity. And so the multiplicity test says the Bible is textually reliable. The third test is the accuracy test. When you have all of these copies, all of these manuscripts, how many deviations are there between the copies, between the manuscripts? So if you have a letter that says, I, Abraham Lincoln, am the 16th president of the United States, and then your neighbor unearths a letter that says, I, Abraham Lincoln, am the most powerful Jedi. You go, okay, that just doesn't work. That's Anakin, right? That's not Abraham Lincoln, we know. So it matters the context that's there. And in the Bible, what you find is any sort of deviations between manuscript fall on nowhere within the primary doctrines of Christianity. The primary, central, core doctrines and secondary doctrines of Christianity are not argued from manuscript to manuscript. The deviations are called ioticisms, tiny little pronunciations, one letter difference, one accent different, one pronunciation different, and not huge, massive deviations. The historian John Montgomery says this: to be skeptical of the resultant texts of the New Testament books is to allow all of classical history to slip into obscurity, for no documents of the ancient period are as well attested bibliographically as the New Testament. This is what John Montgomery says. This is what we believe. If you throw out the Bible, you got to throw out all of ancient history. You got to throw out all of the works of antiquity. But the enemy, Satan, will whisper to you, it's not reliable. It's not reliable. The second thing that he'll whisper is, God is wrong. God's just wrong. You will not surely die. You will be like God. That's what Satan says. You'll not surely die. You'll be like God. God says, stay away from the bad things, but Satan says, hey, those things that he says are bad aren't really bad. Come on. It's college. Come on. It's not that bad. It's not a big deal. It's actually probably good for your social life to do this thing. Come on, it's game day. It's game day. It's not bad. It's normal. It's natural. Come on, your parents expect you to do this. They're already planning that you would do this. It's actually probably good for you. And this is a lie from Satan, that what God says is bad, he would actually go, it's actually not bad. It's actually good for you if you do it. This can be very overt. When you hear God is wrong, it can be very overt to the point where someone would say to you, or you would start to believe, I'm a bigot and judgmental people like me are what is wrong in the world. If someone was to say that to you, if you believe God, not only is he, distorted, but you're what's wrong in the world if you believe this. It's overt like that. There's also much more subtle ways that you might hear that God is wrong. Maybe like a family member goes, you gave, many years of your life and a lot of money to go to college, and you're going to graduate and serve God with your life? That just doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem right. So it can be very subtle. The third thing that he'll whisper to you is that God is holding out on you. He's holding out on you. He knows something and he doesn't want you to have it. It's not best for you. It's what's best for you, but he's holding it back from you. For God knows that when you eat it, your eyes will be open. That's what he tells Eve. The third whisper is that you can make your own rules because you don't really have freedom unless you can make your own rules. You're kind of a slave unless you can make your own rules. And I think this is the most pressing objection that leads to relativism. This is the objection. Because a Christian believes that they have absolute truth, they oppose freedom. Because they believe they have absolute truth, they're then required to push that truth onto everybody else. You're going to take away everybody's freedom, and you don't have freedom. You're not really free. The fact that there is objective truth, or that a person might believe that there's objective truth, in itself means that you're not free. This harms freedom. It takes away from freedom. In fact, in 1992, the Supreme Court ruled and defined this. The heart of liberty is to define one's own concept of existence and the meaning of the universe. The U.S. Supreme Court effectively saying absolute truth is restricting. It takes away your freedom. Sometimes when I'm sharing the gospel with a person, if we're ever in conversation and we come to like an impasse where we're missing each other. They're missing what I'm saying, I'm missing what they say. I sometimes go back to the question, what do you believe about universal truth, absolute truth? Do you think that there could be absolute truth? Do you think that there is absolute truth? Something that's true for you that can't be untrue for me? Is it possible that there is guiding absolute truth? And the way they respond to that question is really fascinating. If they respond, it's possible It's possible there's absolute truth. I'm not sure what it is, but it's possible. Then we can move forward with logic. But if they respond to that question by saying, yeah, there's no such thing as universal truth, there is no such thing as absolute truth, then our conversation comes to a logical standstill, because in asserting there is no absolute truth, that person has just made an absolute truth statement about the universe. There's no such thing as truth. There is no absolute truth, and everybody has to believe that. You have to believe there's no absolute truth. That's an absolute statement. That's an objectively truthful statement. They're trying to create and trying to have, and it counteracts itself, and the entire logical argument itself implodes. See, I don't think that people choose relativism because it's logically sound. I think they choose relativism because it's emotionally palpable for them and because it looks like a hint of truth. It looks like a hint of truth. It looks like it'll lead to freedom. It looks like it'll lead to truth. But to believe in relativism is to be unbelievably foolish and unbelievably ineffective. It means that every person has to reinvent the wheel for themselves. What was learned in history past is able to be questioned. And it doesn't have to have any sort of effect on your life. Learning from another person's discovery can be totally sidestepped if you just don't like what they discovered. And you don't want to get into the realm of like relativism to the point of saying like, if I don't see it with my own eyes, or if I can't prove it with my own eyes, then I don't believe it. You don't want to get into that realm, because then you have to throw out most of science. If you get sick and go to the doctor, you have to like do your own experiments on the drugs and the things that they're going to give you to make you feel better. And you end up being a flat earther. You end up being a flat earther if you throw out objective truth in this way and saying, I can only believe in stuff that I can prove with my own two eyes or my own two hands. That's the logic behind the earth is flat. It's silly. It doesn't make sense. So it seems like the truth is a good thing. It seems like the truth is a good thing. In fact, Jesus says that knowing the truth doesn't restrict freedom. It actually creates freedom. Jesus says that knowing the truth, even if there are restrictions within the truth, can actually lead to freedom. This is what he says in John chapter 8, verses 31 and 32. He says this, if you abide in my word, you're truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. The truth will set you free. The fact that freedom and truth and restriction can coexist is what Christ is putting on the table in front of us. And that's complex to think about. Let's dive into the complexity of how freedom and truth and restriction can coexist together. Let's say you are an airplane pilot. Let's say you're an airplane pilot and you have a whole flight of people in the plane behind you. And for some reason, the autopilot feature goes out. So you're manually controlling your airplane, okay? And you're flying through the fog, and you believe that on the other side of the fog is the landing strip. You believe that the airport is on the other side of that fog. And so you fly towards it, but what's actually on the other side of that fog is the mountainside. And you continue flying through the fog. By the time you realize it's too late, your plane crashes, your passengers perish. Had you known the truth, it would have set you free. You could have pulled up. You could have gone to the left or gone to the right, but because you were out of touch with the truth, you were blind to the truth. You were blind to it because of the fog. You did not have freedom, but the opposite happened. You perished. The modern idea that you have to get outside, away from the truth to be free is not just silly, it's dangerous. It's very dangerous. Freedom comes from the submission to the truth. It seems that that's what Jesus is putting in front of us. Submitting to the truth is what causes freedom, not scurrying out from underneath the truth. In late April of 1980, some government officials went to the front door of a man named Harold R. Truman. And they knocked on his door because they had detected that in his neighborhood, in his backyard, there was a mountain that was registering some seismic activity in Vancouver, Washington. And Harold responded by saying, I'm 80 years old. I'm set in my ways. I don't actually believe that there's anything going on with that mountain. I've lived here my whole life. I've never seen anything weird about that. So I'm just going to stay here. I'm not going to leave. I'm not going to relocate. And he said, as a precaution, I'll just take my bed from the top floor of my house and I'll move it into the basement of my house. And 22 days later, Mount St. Helens erupted in Harold's backyard. And Harold did not leave his house. Didn't leave his house. So let me ask you the question. Was he free? Was he free because he didn't submit to the will of the authorities? Was he free? Well, in one sense, he basically said, you're not going to cost me anything. I'm not going to relocate. I'm not going to let you demand something of me. But in a very real sense, the mountain demanded something much more costly of him, and that was his life. So you see, freedom is not the absence of restriction. Freedom can be present and restriction at the same time. And if done right, restriction can actually create freedom. It can create freedom. My last story here. My great uncle was a fisherman in Northern California, and one day he caught a huge tuna. He hooked a bluefin tuna from the dock, not even from a boat. And he wrestled this thing for hours. I mean, you've seen a bluefin tuna. They're huge, hundreds of pounds, massive, majestic creatures. I mean, these things are so much more powerful than we are. And my uncle knew, if I can get this thing out of the water, out of its environment, and onto dry land, I can overpower it. But as long as this thing is restricted to the water, it's going to overpower me. It's much more powerful. If it comes out of the water, no matter how powerful that thing is, because it's outside of the environment that it was designed for, it loses its power. If you restrict the fish to the water, there's beauty and majesty and speed. So it seems like the right restrictions that fit the reality of your nature is what creates freedom for you. Many of you right now are in college and you're restricting certain aspects of your life in line with your nature so that you can experience greater freedom later. And that can be a really good thing. Restriction now can create freedom later. So we know that freedom, we see, is not just the absence of restriction, but we also know it's not the presence of restriction. Just being very disciplined does not create freedom. It's not just about discipline. Take, for example, the person from your high school who's like trying to make it big in the music industry still. And hopefully that's not like a jab or a hit at anybody who's watching right now. But think about this, like they rise and grind. They hustle and they flow. Their parents are like, you could do anything that you set your mind to. And they restrict their life, restrict, discipline. And everyone around them goes, hey, we just know you just don't have it. You just don't got it. And it almost seems like it's contrary to your nature. Freedom unleashed in the presence of the right restrictions that fit your nature and your purpose. That's the freedom that we're talking about. That's true liberation. Freedom being unleashed in the presence of the right restrictions that fit your nature and your purpose. People don't ascribe to relativism because it's logically conclusive. They ascribe to it because it is emotionally palpable. And I believe that people feel more emotionally connected to relativism because at least it cares for them. At least it cares for them. See, they think there's no way that absolute truth, if it's true for everybody, can personally care about me, can personally be good for me. If it's true for everybody, there's no way that it can be true for me. And it's in that very space that Christ inserts himself into both logic and emotion. He inserts himself into both the head and the heart. He inserts himself into both truth and grace. This is where Christ interacts with the person who says absolute truth cannot be personable. It cannot care for me. It cannot be personally applicable to my life and do good for me. There's no way, if it's true for everybody, that it could be true for me. In John chapter 1, verse 1, John writes these words. He writes this, describing God, describing Jesus. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. If you look at the sixth word in that verse, it's the word, capital W, word. And that word, translated into the language of Greek is the word logos. It's the word logos. It's where we get our word for logic. It's where we get our word for reason. So John writes here, in the beginning was the logic. In the beginning was the reason. It's almost as if John knows that the people he's writing the Bible to are the Greeks that are asking this question. What is our reason? What is our logical reason for existence? It's like they're yelling at him, hey, we see the fish. We know that if you keep the fish in the water, in that environment, it's free. We know that in that environment, it lives. We know that in that environment, it's beautiful and it's powerful, and it was created for that. It was made for that. What were we made for? What is the reason for us? What is the environment in which we were created to live and to thrive and to flourish and to give ourselves to? And the Bible screams out the design purpose of humanity. Page after page reveals the design purpose of humanity. Colossians chapter 1, all things were made for Him. All things were made for God. The purpose, the design, the reason for all things is for Christ. The Westminster Catechism puts this beautifully. It says, what is the chief end of man? What's the reason for man? What is the chief end of man? And it answers that question. The chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. To glorify God and enjoy Him forever. See, John 1 says that there is a truth, and that truth is an absolute truth. It is a logic. It is a reason. It's an absolute truth, but it's not an abstract truth. This truth, absolute truth, embodied human form, became personal to us, became knowable to us, became relational to us, and emotional to us. Absolute truth has become a person. It's become a person available to you. You were made to love Him and know Him and serve Him and enjoy Him. And He loves you and serves you and knows you and enjoys you in the two-way relationship kind of sense. Not a one-way relationship that exploits. Most of our relationships, as we think about them and walk through them, there's some form of exploitation there. If it's one way, one person gives and gives and gives, and the other person just takes and takes and takes. This is not the God of the Bible. This is not our God revealed to us. This is not God in His form of Jesus. This is not who He is. The only religion that says that God is absolute truth and truth became a person is Christianity. And Jesus, when He becomes a person, He gives His freedom away. He restricts His liberation. He restricts Himself. He binds Himself to humanity, binds Himself to suffering, binds Himself to human existence and human language, bound to the cross. So that when you think about the relationship between you and Him, you know it's not a one-way street. Almost as if to say, He goes, I submitted myself so that you can understand how much I know you. I suffered so that you could see how much I have surrendered for you. That's Philippians chapter 2. This is a good God. This is liberation. This is the truth that sets you free. This is the only way that we can know that the truth actually is palpable and understanding and emotive to the individual. Absolute truth, not abstract, but applied in a loving way directly to you. If it's abstract, then it's dehumanizing. If it's abstract, then it's impersonal. And the Ten Commandments do not stand on their own without the person of Jesus. The law and the prophets and the moral ways that Jesus lived have no standing apart from the person of God incarnated in the person of Jesus. Scripture does not stand on its own without the assertion that Jesus Himself, absolute truth, became human, became mankind. All of these things scream design purpose. They scream truth. And this is why Psalm 19 can say, the law of the Lord is perfect. It revives your soul. It goes on to say this, the laws of the Lord and the precepts of the Lord are more desired than fine gold. They are sweeter than honey. The law of the Lord is perfect. The law revives the soul. The law is sweet. The law is valuable. I've never heard anybody talk about laws that way. Laws are black and white. Laws are strict. Laws are impersonal. They are not sweet. Laws don't give life. They're rigid and cold. The only way that Psalm 19 can say that is because when Jesus comes on the scene in Matthew 5:17, he says, I have not come to abolish the law. I've come to fulfill the law. All of the law is fulfilled in me. When you think about those things, you think about me. The law is fulfilled in the person of Jesus because the reason, the logic, the absolute truth became flesh. If you're searching for truth today, you won't find it in a research paper. You'll find it in a person. You'll find it in the person of Jesus. If you're searching for truth today, you don't have to look to a political party. You can look to the person of Jesus. If you are searching for truth, you don't have to find it in a point of view. You find it in a person, the person of Jesus. Truth has a name. Love has a name. Hope has a name. Freedom has a name. And because the truth is a person, that is liberating. So as we finish, God is the only one who can define right and wrong. He's our creator. He knows what's best for us. His commandments lead us to the fullest life possible. They are absolutely true and they are absolutely personal to you because of what Christ has done on your behalf. So we pray that you would reject the lie to make your own rules. We pray you would reject the lie to define your own truth. And we pray that you would cling to the truth that God's design for you leads to life. And that design is culminated and expressed most beautifully and perfectly in the person of Jesus. We love you, Resonate.